Hello everyone, today I will be going over a handful of theories I've had about Deltarune. I've decided to put 4 or 5 theories into one video because they would likely be too short to do on their own, and if you haven't watched my last video I suggest you watch it because some of what I talk about is actually supported by the book, but I'll still try to refresh you during the video, in case any of you haven't watched it. But before I start, spoilers for both Deltarune and Undertale, but mostly Deltarune. Okay, with that out of the way, onto my first theory topic. First theory, what exactly is Ralsei? I have 1 or 2 theories on what I think Ralsei is, but I'll start off with this one, and that is that Ralsei is the anti-Flowey. Now let me explain. In Undertale it is explained that Flowey is Asriel's soul in a flower, as I'm sure you know, but since they're a flower they lost the ability to feel love, and this is where my theory comes in. I think like Flowey, Ralsei is emotionally stunted. Is that the right word? Like Flowey, unlike Flowey that couldn't feel love and only hate, Ralsei is quite the opposite and can only feel love and not hate. We see throughout Deltarune Ralsei is very nice and kind to basically everyone, always believing the best in people, and no matter what you do he's pretty much always like that. Which if you think about it is like kinda weird. No matter how many people you attack or Susie attacks, Ralsei never really gets mad, at most really only a little bit upset or sad, but never really angry or hates on people. Even when he gets crushed by Susie in chapter 2 he has nothing but a smile on his face. And just a side note I thought I'd mention, while Flowey can't love, he can experience positive emotions, like when he laughs. Sure, it's only joy because you killed everyone, but it's still joy no matter how sick/sadistic it might be, and I find it kind of fitting in both Undertale and Deltarune. We have what looks like 2 different forms of Asriel, one that can't love and only hate, and one that can't hate and can only love. They're 2 opposite sides of the same coin. Now with that theory out of the way, onto the second part of my theory on what Ralsei is. In Deltarune it seems that every item in the dark world is somewhat represented by an object or thing, like how Lancer is a card and that the checkerboard is an area in the dark world, and since Ralsei is also something in the dark world that means he's also likely represented in the light world by an object too, right? And I think I've narrowed that object down, the object that Ralsei could be represented by. Now first of, Ralsei is likely represented by something belonging or made by Asriel for a number of reasons. 1, their name is literally an anagram of Asriel. 2, they literally look like Asriel, so I think that I'm probably right. And secondly, since the first dark fountain is in the school, it's likely that like the other things in the dark world, whatever the object that represents Ralsei is would likely belong in a school, or at least wouldn't be out of place in a school. So whatever object is representing Ralsei, it's unlikely to be like a car or a game console or something like that, since that would likely not be in a closet of a school. I know that is a kind of silly example, but it's just to prove an example. So 1, Ralsei has to be represented by something from Asriel, but something that wouldn't be odd to see in the school. Okay, that narrows it down a little bit, but not very much. Now since Ralsei seems so close to Asriel, I think Ralsei has to be represented by something very very close to Asriel, and this is where my theory comes in. I think Ralsei is a drawing by Asriel, but not just any drawing. Okay, this might just be because of my last theory, but a drawing of a flower. Now let me explain. We know that Asriel liked to draw a lot because of the coloring book and the drawings around his bed, and a child's drawing wouldn't be abnormal in a school. In fact, I believe we've already seen some already, but you may ask, why a drawing of a flower? Well, likely because of Asgore. Asgore has a flower shop full of flowers, and it's likely that a young Asriel would not only look up to Asgore but draw pictures of Asgore's flowers for him. Now the only potential plot hole in this, at least that I can think of, is that before he had his flower shop Asgore was the head chief for the police department. So the flower shop is likely a recent venture only after Asriel went to college. Now my explanation for this is pretty simple. It's likely that, yes, he didn't have his flower shop while he was police chief, he likely still had an interest in flowers and gardening while he was police chief, and it's unlikely that Asgore would just suddenly open a flower shop if he didn't have an interest, or knew how to garden. So overall I'm not completely sold on the fact that Ralsei is Asriel's drawing of a flower. I do think it could be possible, and I think it's most likely the closest we'll get, at least until the full game comes out. Who is the entity? Now when I say the entity I mean the one controlling/corrupting the secret bosses, like Jevil and Spamton. Now before I tell you who I think the entity is, I'm going to first analyze and make a sort of profile of this entity in hopes to narrow it down. But first a few things I thought I'd mention before we move on. Firstly, whatever this entity is, it's likely that they're not the knight whoever the knight is, because of a few reasons. One, they have totally different motives altogether. While the knight mostly just puts people into power like with the king, and misleads people like the queen to make a dark fountains. While the entity, however, we have no evidence that they even want to open dark fountains in the first place. Think about it, while the king and queen directly want to open dark fountains, Jevil and Spamton don't really seem to care. Jevil just think they're all in a game and fights you. Spamton really wants his Neo body and to break his strings and get into heaven, and he thinks he needs your soul to do that, and if the knight and entity were the same person it wouldn't make much sense to corrupt Spamton and have them take over Queen's mansion like in the weird route, so it wouldn't make much sense since Queen is the only one trying to open a dark fountain. It seems counterproductive is all. Okay, now that we've established that the knight and the entity are likely not the same person, it is time to profile this entity. Now what do I mean by that? Well, I think the entity has a kind of profile on who they go after. It seems they mostly go after people who are alone or lonely, people who feel like outcasts and likely have deep insecurities. Now this mostly fits Spamton 100%, they were outcast by their friends and alone, so it makes sense that the entity would go after them. Now Jevil on the other hand, we don't get too much info on them at all. All we really know is that they were the jester before turning mad one day, so they locked him up. It seems whatever this entity is, it didn't have as much control over Jevil than Spamton for whatever reason. But I think in general that my theory is correct, that whatever this entity is possibly going after weak, lonely, or outcast people and corrupting them to do their bidding, or at least until it seems like they randomly disappeared. Now why they're doing this I'm not going to discuss, because one, I don't really know why they're doing this. In my opinion there really isn't a lot of evidence for a motive, at least not until the whole game comes out, but if any of you have any ideas feel free to write them down in the comments. Hell, make a video on it yourself. Now that's not going to stop me from speculating on who this entity is though, and I should get the obvious one out of the way, and that's W.D. Gaster. Now I'm not opposed to this idea, I think it could be possible, but I will go over the evidence before I discuss my thoughts any further. And I guess the first thing I should mention is that one, we really don't know much about Gaster in the first place. And that's kinda why I don't like this theory, because since we don't know really anything about them, they could easily be the answer to every mystery in Deltarune, or literally none of them just as easily. Again, we don't know their motives or even if they're even in Deltarune, though I think that they likely are in Deltarune. We really can't be sure, at least with only 2 chapters out. Okay, sorry for the small tangent onto the evidence for it being W.D. Gaster. Now, other than being rather mysterious, there is also the phone connection, which granted is probably the most compelling argument for this theory. Now if you didn't know, to summarize, near the end of the chapter after defeating Spamton, the Addisons say something along the lines of the phone was nothing but garbage noise, and when you try to call in the dark world it plays the Gaster noise. Before saying that it's nothing but garbage noise, just like the Addison said. But apart from that, actually pretty good evidence. There isn't a lot to connect this to Gaster themselves. While I don't think it's impossible that it is Gaster, I just think it's unlikely. Okay, quick addendum, I've already finished the script, but I forgot to mention one other connection to Gaster they may have. While talking to Sham after defeating Jevil, Sham quotes, "Darker yet darker," which is one of Gaster's iconic lines, but this isn't Jevil saying this, It's Sham saying this. Jevil is the corrupted one. If they were the one saying this, then I would believe it a lot more, but they aren't. Sham is, which is definitely interesting, but I don't think is damning evidence in my opinion. And on the same note, Spamton also says something similar but not exact. Spamton says, why am I not big enough? It's still dark, so dark, which is very similar to darker yet darker, but again not exact. Anyway, thought I'd mention it. Now on to the rest of the video. Now originally I was just going to kind of end this here and talk about my next theory, which I will talk about now really quickly. My theory was until now that this entity has mostly been targeting people from the dark world, but who says they only have to target people from the dark world? And going off the theory that this entity can affect/corrupt lighteners, then if they're going after people who feel lonely or that are outcasts and people with insecurities, then that more or less fits Chris to a T. So my original theory was going to be that Chris could be targeted, maybe not next chapter, but sometime during Deltarune. Now I feel like this is a sound theory, at least theoretically so, but then I came up with had a realization. This entity not only goes after lonely/insecure people, but is known to corrupt people, and have a phone, and is somewhat mysterious in their intentions. Does that sound familiar at all? Yes, I believe that the entity could be in fact Chris themselves, unlike in my original theory where I thought Chris might be get corrupted. What if Chris is the one corrupting people like them? People who are sad and lonely, and again everything the entity is known to do, we more or less also see Chris doing in some form, like with corrupting Noel and the fact that they also use a cell phone. Now I'm not saying this theory is foolproof or anything, but what I will say is that I think we have just as much evidence for Chris being the entity than Gaster, hell maybe even more, but we really still have no motive. I'm going to leave this here for now, but feel free to tell me what you think in the comments. Now on to my next theory, and this is one that I've been thinking about for a long time, that Deltarune is Undertale but in reverse order, at least roughly. Now let me explain. In Undertale at the end of the normal route the final boss is the King Asgore, where the throne room is. And in Deltarune the end of the first chapter you also fight a king that has a throne room, that looks pretty similar. They also both have very big castles. Now the evidence for the first chapter isn't that strong. But the second chapter we have a lot more evidence. In Undertale the second to last place was the core, a very technologically advanced place with lots of machinery and stuff, and is also where you fight Mettaton. In Deltarune chapter 2, the cyber world is very similar to Undertale's core. The cyber world is a very technologically advanced place very similar to the core, with lots of lights and everything there, but that's not the only thing. You also fight Spamton, or I guess Spamton Neo, which, you know, is literally using Mettaton's body. There is also one other thing, and that is the basement, which I think is the equivalent to Undertale's true lab for a number of reasons. 1. Just the dark and spooky ambience there are very similar to each other, and there is also one more thing. Remember in the basement where there are these plug things that after you wait a while they show these creepy faces? Well, in Undertale's art book there are these scrapped concepts for the true lab with faces that were meant to come out of the walls. Seem familiar? Yet while not exact they're pretty similar to each other. That's pretty much all I have for this theory. You can comment what you think down below, but I have one or two more things to say about this. 1. If I am right that Deltarune is roughly in reverse order of Undertale, then the popular theory that we might get a water or underwater themed dark world has some validity, because of waterfall in Undertale. But the only problem with my theory is that the game has only 6 main areas, 7 if you include the true lab, and we've already used up 3 of them, so there isn't enough for every chapter, and it's more or less the same with the bosses too. In Undertale there is really only 5 main bosses. Throughout Undertale's neutral tutorial, Papyrus, Undying, Mettaton, and Asgore, so it doesn't really add up, but I think I came up with a few possible options. One is very simple, and that is that technically in Undertale you fight Mettaton not once but twice in 2 different forms, and with the next chapter being TV themed and Mettaton's killer cooking show and the quiz when you first meet Mettaton being in Undertale, I don't feel like it could be too much of a stretch since they're both TV themed. But that's only 6 people. We have the King for Escor, Spamton Neo for Mettaton Neo, and perhaps normal Mettaton for Mike. Maybe. Now I have 2 possible options, at least that I could think of. It's either Muffet, or Napstablook, and both have their possible flaws. The first one, it would mess up the order a little bit, since you fight Muffet between the 2 fights with Mettaton, and second, Muppet has questionable continuity, since they were originally a Kickstarter boss that someone paid to get into the game, and the problem with Napstablook is that they really don't seem like a main boss. They feel more like the mini-bosses like the Royal Guards or all the dogs in Snowdin than one of the main bosses, like Toriel and Papyrus, at least in my opinion, but I don't think it's too impossible. So yeah, that was most of the ideas/theories that I had. I'd love to hear your thoughts and opinions on them in the comments below, but before I end this video, once again I would like to thank you for all the views, likes and subs. I really appreciate it, and it really means a lot to know people like my content/my theories. When I made this channel I had a few ideas on theories I could do, but I have used most of them up, so I'm probably not going to upload for a while, or at least until Undertale's anniversary stream on the 17th, whatever Toby Fox does for it, even if it's just an anniversary concert, I will probably make a video on my thoughts on it. And again, I would just like to thank you guys again for watching my content. Anyway, thank you guys for watching my video, like and sub and all that, and yeah, have a nice day.